Well, good morning, church. Hope you're doing well, and if not, I hope that I can at least help get you towards that. So this is my first time in Restore Church. Thanks for having us come along. I'm here with my husband, front row, and also my son, who's here somewhere. There he is. So today I thought, in the topic of winning the war in your mind, that I would focus on good thinking. So that's what I've called it today. So hopefully, as we can learn what it means to engage in some good thinking, it can help us to understand what that means to have a good life. So those two things can often go together. And when I was thinking about today, when I was asked to come along and contribute something, it's funny how I went back to a time in my life. It was the year of 1997, the 90s. I had just finished my HSC and about to embark on young adulthood and what I thought the rest of the life would look like. And from that point, 18, you don't know what to expect and what it's going to look like. But I did know for a very long time, all I wanted to do was join the police. And that was actually just my goal and my mission since I was very little. And so to me, studying something wasn't really a big deal as such as making sure I studied something that would be helpful for what I wanted to actually do, that what I would learn could actually be useful. And there were a couple of degree options and I was tossing up between them. At the very last minute, I just thought, it was actually the night before the offer was to expire, I accepted psychology. And I thought that could be pretty useful, I think, going into policing, understanding human behaviour and where things maybe go wrong and whatever. And I remember a church acquaintance who I'd bumped into said, "Oh, what have you decided? What will you study?" And this person was a bit further along in their life, a bit older than me. And I said, "Actually, psychology, I think I'll do that." I saw the definition, the study of human behaviour, and thought that could be helpful. And the look on their face, the expression was one of like shock or confusion, a touch of disappointment maybe, so I felt a little bit maybe judged. And they said, "How could you study that as a Christian, knowing that it's so incompatible with the Bible?" And I reciprocated probably the same expression of shock, confusion, maybe disappointment in that statement, because I actually saw it as really compatible from the little that I knew, because there's so many verses about it, there's stories, there's lots of dysfunction in the Bible, and so on. And so I expressed that. And I also said, God made us physical, have a physical body. He also created us with a mind, we have a spirit, we have our emotions, we have our thoughts. I think it's actually important that we understand all about those things. And so it just reminded me of that today, because I thought, how good is it that we can house those things, two things together, that we no longer think in that way. And I understand there were some thoughts and concerns maybe at the time, but we've had some rethinking around that. And what a good thing it is that we can rethink some ideas at times. And so to actually be here, to invite a psychologist, someone who understands mental health and works in this space, to actually bring that together today. Now on the next slide, the scripture verse that I've chosen today that I thought really works well is found in Ephesians 4:22-24. And it says this: "Be made new in the attitude of your minds, and put on the new self created to be like God." And so when being created like God, the scripture goes on to talk about in his holiness and his righteousness. And thankfully through Jesus, we can be created new, and we can have that event happen where we can be a new creation. But I can't say that I am like God in his holiness and his righteousness. And so really the end goal of that involves a bit of a how. So it's great that we've got the what are we aiming for, but actually the process of being made new occurs in the attitude of our minds. And hopefully today you've been probably talking a bit about that so far, I assume. So we'll just go deeper, and it's okay if I repeat a few things that maybe you've already been learning. So what does it mean by the attitude of the mind? Even according to definitions, so basic definitions of what it means, it is your general way of thinking and feeling. Another definition says that it's also the willingness to look at things in different ways. So it's not just how you think and how you feel, but it's also being willing to rethink things, a bit like this story that I shared at the beginning. And when we think about the word attitude on its own, in psychology, an attitude refers to a set of emotions, beliefs, and behaviours towards a particular object, person, thing, or event. So I'll just say that again. It refers to a set of emotions, our beliefs, our behaviours toward a particular object, person, thing, or event. Now, when we think about what that looks like, so we've got thoughts, we've got feelings, we've got behaviours. In terms of thoughts, we put that under an umbrella term called cognitions. You may have heard that term. It essentially just means to how we think, how we believe, our ideas, perceptions, the ability to analyse, where we put our attention, curiosity. It can also be our inner voice, so what it is that we say to ourselves, our self-talk. It can be the chatter. So it's that dialogue. We all are aware of the voice that's inside our head as we go about our day, as we make decisions, as we consider and ponder things. The cognitive processes can also be the narrative or the story that we create and tell ourselves. And that can be based on events in our life, our experiences. We can actually weave together a story about who we are and how we see ourselves. A narrative can also be something that can go into our future. How many times have you maybe thought about what maybe you're going to be doing, what's coming up in your life, and you start having a what if, and a what if that, what if this happens, and this might go bad, or this might go wrong, and before you know it, you've actually created a whole scenario, and it hasn't even really happened yet. And so you've created this story, and when you do that, what do you feel? You feel fear, you feel anxious, you feel afraid, and the tendency then for our behaviour is to withdraw or to avoid. And we have also, in that creation of a story, totally forgotten that actually there might be another version. There might be some other parts to a story that could actually help us to feel encouraged or motivated and so on. On the next slide, if we can put that one up, please. Thank you. Yep, great. So, our feelings. And in my practice, this is really where people are coming in to see me because of how they're feeling, what's going on emotionally, maybe having difficulty managing those emotions and so on. So as we think about this right now, if it's okay, just have a little thought around for yourself what sorts of emotions or feelings maybe you have difficulty with. Maybe it's difficulty controlling, managing. Maybe those feelings get in the way. So if we're anxious, the tendency is to avoid because we feel afraid of what might happen. So just have a think about a particular feeling or emotion maybe for yourself. Now, we're pretty good in society at communicating our emotions, I think, at least through text form. We've got these symbols called emojis. And even the way the emojis are catalogued, we have categories. So we've got the happy types of feelings. We've got the maybe the anxious or the sad feelings, so when we can feel upset by something, distressed. We've also got the angry ones, and then we've also got the ones where we can feel afraid or embarrassed by things, feeling nervous. A little interesting exercise is to maybe look at your phone and have a look at your most frequently used emojis and see if that reflects anything currently in your life at the moment. I know for me, when things have been maybe frustrating or stressful, I've probably tended to use more of those angry ones, maybe the eye rolls, maybe mind blown when something's just really ridiculous. And so we share and we communicate in this way. So there's lots of different words I've got there as well. So again, positive, broadly, negative, maybe neutral types of sort of feelings that we can have. One of my favourite emotions is awe. And awe is actually really good for us, really healthy. And awe is something that we can experience when we have this almost moment of wonder, when we kind of go, wow, that's amazing, and you want to share it or take a photo. It could be driving along a road and coming across a crest down a street, and all of a sudden there's a most amazing sunset. And every time we see an amazing sunset, it's the most amazing sunset ever. And if we've got people in the car with us, we want to share it. And in that moment of awe, nothing else sort of matters. It can be so captivating and consuming. And so that's why we enjoy going on holidays and maybe trying new experiences and so on. It's a wonderful emotion that God wants us to really tap into as well. On the next slide, we go back to the attitude of the mind. We can really summarise it in this model up here. And what this model is saying is that we feel and we do what we think, but we don't often think about it in that way. If you can think of even just that emotion that maybe you chose before, consider what happens when you maybe feel that. What is it that you do? And maybe consider maybe what you think before that happens. Because you see, we often think that situations, people, or things that we do come into our experiences actually cause us to feel and do certain things. You made me so angry. You made me do that. When you said this, I acted like this because it just made me so awful, or that was really upsetting, or I can't possibly do that because I'll feel too anxious, or whatever it might be. So there might be, maybe just some students here today studying Year 12, and I'm not really referring to them if they are or they aren't here, but studying could be something that our behaviour might be something that we're trying to do, or maybe it's our work, trying to do an important work project. And so often we can have our behaviour or our intention of what we'd like to actually do, but we don't actually do it. Or maybe we don't want to do something, but we do. And I feel like Paul said that in the scriptures all those years ago. So if we look at studying, the goal of maybe going along and sitting and doing some work, we've got our books, laptop, notes, papers, we're all set to go, and we sit down. Then all of a sudden our attention moves to the phone, and maybe we're scrolling, maybe we're messaging a friend, maybe we're even organising to head out somewhere. Put our attention back to the attempt to study, and then maybe we're up in the kitchen for the 10th time, opening the fridge for the 20th time. Before you know it, you might be on the lounge with a remote that suddenly appeared in your hand, and you've watched now the 3rd episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I assume the laughter is acknowledgement that that's what we can all kind of do. So that behaviour is called procrastination. We're avoiding, and we're avoiding because maybe what we're trying to do or should be doing is boring. Maybe it causes discomfort. Maybe it causes us to feel stressed. And so the thoughts before that are actually what's really important. And it's thinking about how we can then, reattend to this, maybe set up our environment a little bit better. But the point of this example, and I could choose any number of them, I was going to talk about Christmas time at Castle Towers, trying to find a parking spot, but I think you know what I'm going to say there. So our beliefs, our ideas, our mental images, attitudes and thoughts influence how we feel and what we do, often more than the event itself. Now, I never want to say that situations, events and experiences don't matter, because they absolutely do. It's really important that we acknowledge those situations, get support, understand the impact of those. So it's not to minimise that, but the space between something happening in our life or to us in a situation and our response to that is this part that can go on in between our ears. How we're thinking, how we're perceiving. Are we perceiving the intent of other people in line with what maybe it is, or are we kind of skewing it? Sometimes we can have a sinister bias where we can assume maybe people are hurting us or so on. On the next slide, I've got just another little scripture there, some Proverbs wisdom. I really like the first version. It says here in Proverbs 4:23, be careful what you think, because your thoughts run your life. And the second verse, or the second version, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. So again, as I reflect on how wisdom of the word and what we know about human behaviour actually really does line up. And so the power of understanding what we think, our stories, our belief systems can really run what we decide to do and how we live. On the next slide. Now, this is an image you're not going to see unless you brought your binoculars, and that's okay. I assume no one did. It's actually, there's a whole lot of data that was collected, and all these amazing people that know how to work with that pulled out all these cognitive biases that we are capable of producing. Our brain is capable of producing up to 188 different types of cognitive biases and effects, which after I've just said to you, be careful what you think, you're now wondering, why am I showing you this? Because it's almost like saying it's difficult to even control all of that. But that's actually the point. You've all heard of the placebo effect, I'm sure. So even in research trials, they know that this exists, that when they have a treatment, an active ingredient for something, and a control group where nothing's happening, they have to put in a placebo, because when we think that something's going to help us or improve a symptom, it starts to work even before it's physiologically possible. Which is why when we take Panadol, we might notice the effect before it's really having that effect. There's also the IKEA effect. And no, that's not when you walk out of IKEA with a pot plant and all these knickknacks at the end, although that does happen. The IKEA effect is that we tend to value and appreciate things we put together and create ourselves. Or there can be the negativity bias, or be biased by our mood. So if I was to run an experiment where a third of you watched something really sad and you had to memorise words, you're more likely to remember those sad words versus maybe another group where you were induced to feel happy and positive. You're more likely to take notice of the positive words and remember them. So what this is demonstrating is that because our brain can be affected by all these biases and effects, we have to be careful what we believe. That what comes into our mind might not be the whole truth. It can be persuaded by something. There may be a filter where we're only seeing and believing a certain number of things. So the next slide talks about our automatic thoughts. So our brain, as I said, is capable of producing these different thoughts, and by and large we could say that a lot of them are just neutral, especially maybe if we're just going along okay, like there's lots of clouds in the sky today. Something about, the temperature, or where am I going to sit, or whatever. Generally, there's not a lot of emotion that's attached to those neutral automatic thoughts. We can obviously have positive, like this is something I can do really well, or I'm looking forward to seeing someone, or whatever. Negative automatic thought is I'll probably fail this test. So the point is that it's not so much about what comes into our mind, and I know that we would like to control every part of that. It's actually the belief in the thought that comes into our mind. Our brain is designed to think and perceive and analyse and scan all the time, and it's always going to be thinking weird things, strange things, things that maybe don't make sense. But it's what we do with those thoughts. So I'd like to introduce Exhibit A, please. Ants. Now, we have what's called these automatic negative thoughts. And you might not have known that when you have a negative thought, that's what they look like. So they look like ants. And if anyone's actually had ants in your house, they're real pests, aren't they? We have to get rid of them. And often we have to kind of find the source as well. What are they coming in for? Where are they going? And it's not just one ant. It's usually a whole army of them. And so just like our house, our physical house, our mental house, if you like, we can be prone to ant invasions. And so I just want to go through something really practical today, if that's okay, with regard to how we're going to manage those ants. I've had my fair share of them, and one in particular I remember, again, it goes back to my journey of studying. I'd finished my master's in psychology, and that's when you really do all the major training and do a whole lot of free work, internships and so on. And my second son was born just at that time, a few weeks old, and I graduated, took a year off. And I really felt the urge and the itch to maybe go back to something. So I really loved research, and I wanted to go back and do that. And I was thinking it could be good, mix it in with looking after family, some part-time work, and I'll just chip away at it. And so I looked up some positions that were available, local places, and there was one that really excited me. I thought, wow, I could really give this a go, I think. And I knew of the researchers and the projects. And I was building up to do this big proposal for it, and then this ant crawled in and said, you couldn't do that. And then another one come along and said, there'll be other applicants who would get in, wouldn't bother trying. It's really this sort of person they're looking for, and so on. So I had a whole lot of ants come in. So what was actually something that was really exciting and motivating and engaging for me, all of a sudden became a disappointment. And it wasn't a disaster. I kind of started to go, oh, well, whatever. But I was disappointed. And so it took from what potentially I was excited about doing in my next step to not doing it at all. I was having a conversation with someone after this. It was actually my mother, and she was asking what I was planning on doing. And I said, I told her the opportunity and that I wasn't going to do it. And I remember just the, parents, their loving, corrective way. She actually asked me and said to me, "What tells you that?" And I actually had to stop and think, and I couldn't just say all these ants, But I said, well, I gave all the excuses of why I couldn't do it. And she challenged that. And so I had to take that on board, and I'm like, she's right. I'm only considering all these negative thoughts. Maybe I could revise that. So what I did, if I could have the next slide, please. Yep. I had to take my aunt to court. Now, this is a great strategy that you can use for basically anything. Essentially, if there's any legal people in the room or anyone who's had any familiarity with the court system, you can't walk in there with an opinion or hearsay. You've actually got to have some facts and some evidence. You've got to have something to really back it up. And so I had to take my aunt to court and really look at why did I think it was true that I couldn't do it. And of course, it could be something like, well, they can't accept everybody. There's a chance that you could, you might not get through, or it might be hard, all those sorts of things. But I had to look at the other side of it. And then I came to the verdict. I thought, you know what, I can't assume that it's not going to work out for me. I do need to maybe give it a go. All I can do is try, and I can't, predict this story that I think is going to happen. So of course, long story short, I did actually apply. I did get accepted. And it worked out to be a really fulfilling thing for me that I'm glad I just gave it a go. Now, I haven't been accepted into everything. There's been job interviews that I didn't get and so on. But the point is that we don't want to allow these thoughts or doubts to cause us to avoid. So we have the situation, we have the thoughts, we have those feelings, and then our behaviour. And that's why believing and being careful what we think can actually run your life or create issues and so on. So, in summing up, on the next slide, I've just got some tips, if you like, on healthy thinking. Good thinking is healthy thinking. We don't have to think positive all the time. In fact, I'm not here to say that. A lot of times when we're working through particular challenges, something that maybe is making us feel really anxious or maybe really mad, the whole point of working on our thoughts is actually to help us to feel maybe less mad, and that's a good thing, or less anxious, and then we have to then work on how we behave. And those two things can often go together. So healthy thinking is balanced and it's realistic. It's the thinking around what is maybe most likely to happen, what might happen, what could, what are some possibilities. Asking questions, so using what's called Socratic questioning, where we actually ask ourselves these things. What's the evidence? What could happen? What have I done before? What do I know about other people? And so on, to help encourage us in that. And to have realistic thinking about ourselves, but also about others and the future. As I mentioned before, sometimes when we can be angry or hurt or offended, we can hold that offence, and we can also be seeing others as being intentional in what they're trying to do as well. I don't know if anyone else has had times where you thought someone didn't really like you, and then you realised actually you got it wrong, and you change your behaviour towards that person if you believe that. You might not say hello, you might not be friendly, and we can get into the whole self-fulfilling prophecies whole thing as well, where we actually create what it is that we're assuming. We need to develop some self-talk that's kind, compassionate and supportive. And just this week when I was working with someone, they were speaking in such a harsh way about themselves, and I actually stopped them and I said, could I ask you that if your really good friend, someone you cared about, was actually telling you that story, would you say those same words to them? And she said, oh, no, absolutely not. That would be horrible. I wouldn't do that. I said, would that be encouraging? Would that be helpful? She says, no. I said, so, and at that moment, seeing what she was doing to herself and changing that self-talk. We need to manage our expectations. If anyone's got a 3-year-old, you know that you have to manage expectations around what you can do and what you can expect them to do as well. And if we assume that they should be able to get up out of bed, organise their day, get ready, monitor the time, get out the door and into the car, having had all their breakfast and everything, you're mistaken. And if you have that expectation, it doesn't happen, what are you going to feel? Stressed, irritable, angry. But sometimes if we can just make our expectations a bit more realistic, it's going to help with how we respond. We need to learn how to problem solve worries or concerns. We're always going to have concerns and issues. One of the best things that I advise people, the most common, things I advise people is when they're worried about something, first get information about it. The number of times that we're worried about something and we don't actually have the right information. And so getting that is helpful. And then problem solving, maybe with someone else. What are some possible courses of action, solutions? Let's try something out. We've already talked about that willingness, so the attitude of the mind and being open to different ways of thinking and seeing situations. So sometimes if you've got a thought that comes in, ask yourself, am I assuming this? And can I possibly rethink it? What's another perspective? Develop a growth mindset, not a fixed one. That just means that when we're learning something, whatever that might be in school, in life, in work, getting better at something is something that just takes time. So a really powerful word, when you say I can't, say I can't yet. And that word can change everything. And avoid shoulding and musting. What I mean by that is when you notice your language, like I should do this and I must do that, or they should, they must, you're creating a rule. And what happens with rules? They get broken and then we get disappointed. So it's just changing that to I would prefer, it would be good if, I would like it if, and that gives you that a bit more openness to accept when things don't go quite right. Finally, on the next slide, I've just got a couple of places that you might like to visit if you need a bit more help. And these 2 places, I can vouch for them. I know some of the people that have worked there. They do a lot of research and they do put a lot of work into developing some programs that really do tackle our thoughts and our emotions and how to improve behaviour. MindSpot is completely free and it can also come with like a coach, someone who's trained and qualified to work through and help you, really walk through issues maybe around depression, anxiety and so on. And This Way Up have also got some really great resources. Some are free, some are low cost, that actually will help with things like stress, insomnia, our mood, study stress, all sorts of different types of mood or anxiety problems. So this is a skill. I really want to emphasise that as much as you might look at this and go, it's pretty simplistic, or you go, I could never do that. The reality is actually it is hard and it's a skill. So have that growth mindset and look at being just open to stopping, your perspective in that moment. What am I thinking? Is there another perspective I can have? And if you're finding it hard on your own, this is what we do this job for. So that's it from me, Adrian.